By the end of this video, I want you to understand the science behind each step of the manifestation process, because each different step is either backed by or correlated to science. So you'll understand why we're doing each step of the manifestation process, and you'll see how we can harness the power of neuroscience and maybe even quantum physics to completely shift our lives. My name's Georgia. I'm currently studying a master's degree in consciousness, spirituality and transpersonal psychology. And in my free time, I love to study anything about the links between science and spirituality and how we can shift our own lives for the better. Now, I've been interested in the law of attraction for years, and as someone who has a very analytical mind, I really like to understand why exactly I'm doing something. So for the past year or so, I've been doing a deep dive into the science that correlates to manifestation. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through every step of the manifestation process and explain to you how each of those steps is either backed by or correlated to science. And for the purposes of this, I've split the manifestation process into 4 distinct steps. So the first step of the manifestation process is to reprogram our mind, meaning we need to change our predominant thought patterns to ones that are in alignment with our desire. So this step of the process can actually be divided into 2 sub-steps. So on the one hand, we need to learn to release old thought patterns, and on the other hand, we need to learn to program in new thought patterns. Now, the science underpinning this step of the process comes down to something called neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is a property of our brain, which basically means we can actually physically reshape and rewire our brain. So within our brain, we have billions of brain cells called neurons, and through harnessing neuroplasticity, we can actually rewire our neural pathways through different actions and different thought patterns. So how do we harness the power of neuroplasticity to reprogram our mind for the purposes of manifestation? So let's look at the first step of the process first, which is releasing old thought patterns. So basically, we want to get rid of any habitual thought patterns we have that are not in alignment with our desires. Any negative beliefs we have about either ourselves or reality in general, we want to get rid of those thought patterns and make sure that they're not habitual. So the way we do this is through mindfulness and meditation. Now, I would personally recommend meditating every day. However, you don't need to meditate to be mindful. Basically, what is key is cultivating a sense of awareness in which you learn to observe your thoughts rather than feeding into them and getting stuck in thought spirals. And this is why meditation is really helpful, because firstly, it allows you to become aware of your thought patterns. So you might have some negative thought patterns that you don't even really realise, but when you're sat there and meditating and have nothing to do except pay attention to your thoughts, then you do start to learn what your habitual thought patterns are. So when you become aware of those thought patterns and which ones are negative, then it becomes a lot clearer what thought patterns you want to change. And then the second benefit of meditation, in addition to identifying the thoughts that you don't want, is that you can learn to let those thoughts pass by when you do experience them. Because what usually happens when we haven't cultivated a sense of awareness is that some kind of negative thought, one of the habitual thoughts we have, comes up, and we get carried away with that thought, and we end up in these negative thought spirals, and we basically keep feeding this thought, which strengthens the neural pathways associated with that thought. But through meditation and mindfulness, if we can learn to just observe the thought when it arises and let it go, then what we're doing is no longer feeding into that thought. And this means we're stopping activating the neural pathways associated with that thought, which allows those neural pathways to weaken and eventually prune away. Now, once you've achieved this, it means that those negative thought patterns are no longer going to be habitual. On the flip side, you want to program in new thoughts that actually align with your desired reality. So these might be thoughts of self-confidence, self-love, abundance, whatever it is, any positive thoughts that are going to align with the reality that you're trying to create. Now, the way we do this is through a number of techniques. The most obvious one is affirmations, where you are repeating a set of thoughts to yourself on a daily basis. You could also try hypnosis. Another thing you could do that I do as well is you could actually create a recording of your affirmations and play them as you fall asleep, because it is believed that during the theta brainwave state, which is what you drift through as you fall asleep, it's believed that that is when your subconscious mind is most reprogrammable. You can also just consciously choose on a day-to-day basis to switch your old thoughts with the new affirmations that you want to program in. But essentially, the thing that links all of these techniques together is that by repeating these new thoughts, we are now exercising new neural pathways in our brain. And the more we do this repetition and keep repeating the thoughts, the stronger those neural pathways become. So through harnessing neuroplasticity, we're actually physically rewiring our brain to make it more likely for us to think these new thoughts. And you'll have eventually reprogrammed your mind. Okay, so now we've reprogrammed our mind, so what happens next? Step 2 is all about solidifying these new thoughts into beliefs. And this is something that should start to happen naturally through a system in our brain called the reticular activating system. Now, the reticular activating system is a network of neurons located in our brainstem that effectively filters our reality. So one of its functions is that it regulates our attention by filtering incoming sensory information. So it filters out irrelevant stimuli and it filters in stimuli that are important to us. So the reticular activating system is going to start filtering in information that is in alignment with the new thoughts that we've programmed in. So we're going to start seeing confirmation for our new thoughts, and this is going to help us build these into beliefs. Because if you think about it, when you continually see evidence for something, that is when you start to believe it. So through reprogramming our thoughts, we have essentially primed our mind to start looking for evidence itself that's going to confirm our new beliefs. Have you ever noticed that when you start focusing on something, then you suddenly start to see that thing everywhere? That is because of your reticular activating system. So we're basically harnessing this power to confirm our new thought patterns. So if you've reprogrammed your mind to start thinking about abundance, then you're going to start seeing abundance everywhere. Or if you've reprogrammed your mind to have a more loving and positive outlook on life, then you're again going to start seeing circumstances that confirm that to you, because your reticular activating system is going to be focusing in on those bits of information that confirm those thoughts, and filtering out information that contradicts those thoughts. And now that we're starting to solidify our new thought patterns into beliefs, it's going to be much easier to also feel in alignment with our desires. That's another part of the law of attraction, feeling your desires and feeling as if you have them before they are there in your physical reality. Now, if any of you are familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks a lot about how our thought patterns condition our bodies into a certain set of emotions. And this is because whenever we think a thought, it creates a biochemical process in the brain, and a chemical signal is then released into our body, which creates the emotions. So if we keep thinking the same thoughts and releasing the same chemicals to produce the same emotions, we condition our body into a certain set of emotions. But now that we've switched our thought patterns and started reprogramming our mind and our beliefs, then we can essentially condition our body into a new set of emotions that align with our desired reality. So now that we've created a belief system that is in alignment with our desired reality, what is the next step? So step number 3 is actually doing the work and taking action towards our desires. Now, you may hear a lot from law of attraction teachers this thing called inspired action. Now, inspired action is the idea that through this manifestation process, you're going to start feeling naturally drawn to actions that are in alignment with your desire. Now, I am someone who does have very spiritual beliefs, so I do believe that there is a spiritual aspect to this idea of inspired action. However, from a scientific perspective, I do believe that the reticular activating system, again, plays a role in this idea of inspired action. Now, this is because, as we've already discussed, the reticular activating system filters our reality based on our beliefs. So now that we've rewritten our beliefs to be in alignment with our desires, we're going to start noticing opportunities that align with our desires. So these might be opportunities that we never even noticed before, but now essentially what we can do is not just take any action towards our desires, coming from a place of uncertainty or not knowing what action to take. We can actually take actions that are in alignment with our desires, because our brain is going to be filtering in opportunities that we may never have noticed before. So basically, all of the reprogramming that we've been doing of our mind is going to allow us to take more effective action. We have essentially primed our mind to zone in on opportunities that are going to bring us closer to our desired reality. So through steps 1 to 3, we have already changed our reality in the sense that we're now perceiving a new reality because we've primed our brain to pick up on new things. And we've also started taking action towards our desires. So what's next? Does it go further than this? Is it just a matter of changing our perception of reality, or can we actually draw a reality to us? Can we actually influence physical reality? This is where it starts to get a bit more speculative and where we can only draw correlations as opposed to explanations from science. So basically, within quantum physics, there is an interpretation that suggests that we might be able to use our consciousness to influence our physical reality. And note here that I say it is an interpretation because it's not proven. So this all comes down to an experiment called the double slit experiment. And basically what happened in this experiment is that the results implied that particles act differently depending on whether or not they are being observed. And I'm using the term observed here very loosely because most of the interpretations don't believe that this has anything to do with a human observer. So what happened in this experiment is that when particles were observed, and this doesn't mean by a human observer, it means that they were using a measuring device that was essentially detecting the atoms. So when the particles were being observed in that sense, they were acting like particles. So they were tiny little balls of matter that were localized in space. But what was very mysterious is that when the particles were not being observed, so when the measuring device wasn't present, then they started to act very strangely. Basically, when they're not being measured or observed, it seems like the particles are behaving like waves. Now, we can't say that they definitely are waves during this state, because if we try and look or measure them, then suddenly they act like particles again, so we don't know what's happening in this in-between state. However, what we do know is that when they're in this mysterious state, they produce something called an interference pattern. Now, an interference pattern is characteristic of waves. It's what happens when two waves interfere with each other. I'll leave an image on the screen of that so you can see what I'm talking about. So this interference pattern, which is being created in the double slit experiment when we're not looking, is something that is characteristic of waves. So it implies that the particles are behaving like waves, but we don't know that they actually are waves. Now, there have also been other experiments that imply that during this mysterious state where we don't know what's happening, that the particles are actually in a superposition of different states at once. So they're in many different states at the same time. Now, this is where it kind of correlates to manifestation, because we're assuming that this superposition of states correlates to all of the different potential realities that you can manifest, and then the particle in its localized material form corresponds to the reality that you're experiencing, the reality that is materialized. So the question is, what causes the particle to go from this superposition of different states to becoming one discrete localized particle? Now, most interpretations of quantum physics don't believe this has anything to do with human observers or consciousness, but there is one interpretation that does, and this is called the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation. Now, the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation suggests that it is human consciousness that somehow causes the wave function to collapse into a physical particle. Now, the wave function is just a mathematical description of all of the potentialities of the particle when it's in that state that we can't look at, so when we don't know what's going on. So whatever is happening during that mysterious state where it seems like the particle is in all of these different states at once, the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation suggests that somehow our human consciousness can cause those states to collapse into one finite state. So if this interpretation is correct, then it implies that our consciousness can actually influence physical reality. So in law of attraction terms, this would provide a potential explanation as to how the manifestation process might actually allow us to change our reality. So it wouldn't be just a matter of us shifting our perception of reality or us taking action to get our desires. It would imply that there is actually an element of this where we actually can physically draw a reality to us. But as I said, this interpretation is not proven. Well, none of the interpretations in quantum physics are. Basically, no one ultimately knows what is going on. Now, I am actually planning a video that's going to go really in depth into the quantum physics behind manifestation. I did actually already do one, but since then I've done a lot more reading on it and I feel like I've really evolved my understanding of it. So I want to do an updated video on that. But until then, I hope you can see that the manifestation process isn't merely just a metaphysical concept or a spiritual concept. It can actually be correlated to science. And in the case of neuroscience, perhaps even backed by science. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you now understand exactly why the manifestation process can cause you to shift your reality. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.